Ever felt frustrated being told PMS, heavy bleeding, and cramping are just normal parts of life? You are not alone. I loathed my monthly cycle for decades. That all changed when I earned 3 health coaching certifications discovering something incredible. Your period is vital. It is an outward sign of your inner health, and it holds the key to unlocking your full potential. I've been there battling heavy, painful periods, and I turn them into cycles with minimal PMS and cramping. Today, I'm on a mission to share that information with you. Pour a cup of your favorite drink, get comfy, and grab your headphones as we embark on a candid and empowering journey of self-discovery. Together, we'll demystify menstrual cycles, explore cyclical living, delve into natural birth control, and guide parents through those crucial period talks with tweens and teens. It's time to break the taboo around menstruation and embrace the wisdom it holds. I'm your host, Heather Almendinger, and this is the Embracing Flow podcast. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Embracing Flow. I'd like to introduce our guest today, an expert at Embracing Flow, Dana Parisi. Dana, welcome to Embracing Flow. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you, Heather, for having me. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
I am looking forward to this conversation as well. Listeners, here's why Dana's visiting with us today. She is a certified parent and family coach and a brain spotting practitioner. She has a focus on trauma-informed approaches. Dana is the mom of 4 children, 2 biological and 2 adopted, ranging in age from 10 to 19. She is passionate about working with families of kids who have persistent, challenging behaviors as a result of early life trauma, neurodiversity, or mental health struggles. Her mission is to help families move from survive to thrive. Through her business, Lives Touched, she works with parents locally as well as globally through one-on-one coaching, webinars, presentations, self-paced courses, and brain spotting. Her first book, Parenting Marathon, the 10-Step Guide to Navigating Parenting Challenges, was released in September 2023 and became an Amazon International bestseller. I love that you are doing all of this, Dana, and that you are here. So again, welcome.
Thank you.
Before we dive into all of that juicy stuff that I just read about and how he kind of got there and some of the topics that we discuss that we want to share with our listeners, would you be open to sharing one of your cycle stories, and about what age did you start cycling?
Yeah, I love it that you asked that question and just normalizing that conversation because even though I'm a parent of 4 and I have 2 teenage daughters, and of course we're having those conversations, it's still it's still hard to it's not the thing that we'd sit around talking about around the dinner table necessarily. So I love it that you asked that. Reflecting back, I would say I was for sure in middle school, I would say 13 when I started getting my period. I do feel like I was prepared. I knew it was coming. I'm pretty sure my mom and I had 1 or 2 conversations about it beforehand, which I think at that time was pretty good because some people, were really avoiding talking about it altogether. I don't have any super funny stories necessarily, but one story in my early cycle experience that really stands out to me. So it wasn't the first time I had gotten my period, but it was early on and my cycle wasn't real regular yet. And so I remember getting caught off guard. I was in middle school and I did not have the supplies in my backpack that I needed. And I remember being too self-conscious to tell the nurse that that's what was going on. Like I didn't want to talk about it. So I did the old tie the sweatshirt around the waist kind of thing and went to the nurse and said I was sick. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she must have had an appointment. One of her friends picked me up. And I remember driving home with my mom's friend, and it was raining, but just real light drizzle. And so the window wipers were just intermittently go 4 or 5 seconds. And I was so deep in my thought about this new journey now that I have to deal with my getting my period all the time and that I didn't want to be caught off guard again, that I was in my head. And every time those wipers moved, which must have been the same amount of time in between, I jumped every single time because I was just deep in thought of this new chapter of my life and oh, this is how it's going to be forever. And so every time I was just whoa, I got startled each time, which is funny that that just really stays in my memory.
And it's interesting how our memories, they come up, and which ones come up when asked that question, because for you that is a very prominent memory, and you remember very structurally that you would jump every time the windshield wipers would go on, where somebody else may have been in a similar situation, but that wouldn't have phased them. That would, oh yeah, that kind of did happen to me. So it's very interesting the stories that do come up and what memories come up with your children. And as you see, you have your daughters, and you're open kind of about this conversation. Is there a different way of bringing this topic up with your daughters? Does one learn differently than the other one, or is it a similar conversation? Is it slightly different? How do you balance that, especially with what you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think any parent that has more than one kid, recognizes how unique our kids can be from each other. And my two girls, one is a biological child and one is an adopted child. So, they have that difference as well, but they have a different personality and different ways of coming to things. So I would say, I approach it a little bit different with both of them. It was helpful for me, as a little bit of a type A parent and like not being, I don't know if it's like, I wasn't that I'm uncomfortable with the conversation, but it's just not necessarily my preference. So it was helpful for me to have a tool with both girls, like a book. And so I think I did use at least one resource that was the same, kind of just talking about the biology behind how our bodies are created and that this is normal. And actually, one thing that stands out to me is that my oldest two kids, who are both biological, are only 17 months apart. It's a boy, girl. And I had this dream in my head that my husband would deal with growing up puberty biology with my son, and I would do it for my daughter. And that just really wasn't the way it worked out for a variety of reasons. I ended up ultimately feeling like this is going to be my responsibility, or he's not going to get the information I want him to have. And so then I wasn't sure, do I need to give separate moments, which is nice too. But I just decided I'm going to go over this stuff together, the biology of how males' bodies work and women's bodies work and how babies are created and cycles, and just kind of normalize that it's part of the human experience. It's normal. And one of the things, so both of my biological kids have ADHD, so neurodiversity, neurospicy, as you said. Um, but my son is very empathetic and like hearing about women's cycles and starting to get their period and bleeding. He was young. We were in elementary school when we started having those conversations, I remember him saying, "Wow, that must be really scary for girls if they don't know that that's coming." And just the fact that this young elementary boy could be empathetic to a young woman's experience, I'm like, yeah, that is true. So I think that's one thing that helped me with all my kids is using some kind of a resource and then tailoring it from there.
I I love the fact that you found a resource that worked, and you did it together, because it is that's destigmatizing the whole cycle, and opening it up that you can have those conversations, because your son's going to have a partner possibly that menstruates, and your daughter is going to have a partner that doesn't, and for them to understand what the other's going through is something that I have found is currently unique with your family. It's not something that's openly discussed in my household. I talk to my sons about, well, my older son about it. My younger son, I will here in the next year or so, because he's in third grade. And I know that here in the next year or so, he's going to have classmates, and he's going to notice the changes of the classmates. And he's also somewhat empathetic. But I'm happy that you found that tool, and it worked very, very well for your family. And it'd be great if that's something that the listeners can bring into their family as well. You deal with trauma and challenges of the family. Can you share a little bit about how you got into that, and how you help the parents and the children start that partnership and re-engage that partnership and become that cohesive unit that children thrive in and parents really want for their kids?
Yeah, it's like most of our stories, we come at them in complicated ways. So my first profession was physical therapy, absolutely loved it. That's what I studied in school and I did it for 10 years. I thought that would be my full-time career. And then as our family grew through adoption, I found that I was encountering behaviors that were, I don't want to say I was necessarily unprepared for them because you do get some education going into it that, kids who have experienced those losses really have experienced trauma and it can come out in a lot of different ways. So I wasn't blind to that, but I also would say I was a bit blind to it in thinking I was pretty much equipped to handle whatever came my way. I'm sure I could figure it out, like I was a good enough parent and I had some parenting experience already. And what I found was that I met my match in, in challenging and baffling behaviors and the tools that I had for parenting, that I think were kind of normal tools for that generation, my generation, were just not working for my child who had experienced more attachment trauma. And so we were not moving in a positive direction. We were moving in a negative direction. So I had to get more tools in my toolbox. I worked with a trauma-informed coach, which was very humbling for me to like accept that I needed help, but it also was the greatest gift because it got us out of a dark spot and really gave me a passion to help other families. I don't only work with families of kids who have, adoption or foster care stories because there's a lot of reasons why a kid might be struggling and having challenging behaviors, including their neurodiversity or mental health things. So, how do I do it? One, I just love meeting with parents and hearing their story and what's going on. And really, ultimately, we drill down to the challenges because that's why they're meeting with me and what their goals are. And each family, each parent is so different. But then helping them identify their goals and then helping them understand some of the root issues beneath the behavior. So maybe your listeners are familiar with the picture of an iceberg, and what we see with the behaviors of our kids is above the surface. It's really true. Below the surface, there's a lot of other things going on. And so helping those parents, start with their empathy to some of those other reasons, those root issues, and then addressing those. But one of the first things we do is work on our parents' self-care. Which, as a parent, when I was in that spot and they're like, let's work on your self-care, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't have time for this. I've got like serious issues happening in my home, serious behaviors. I don't have time to breathe and like go get my nails done. But there's a lot of ways to build our resilience as parents. And our part of it, our part of the interactions is really so crucial. I just had a parent tell me that they are recognizing that they set the tone for their household. And it's true because we're humans, we interact with each other's way of presenting in the world and our emotions. And so if we're in a better spot, we can bring that tone to our families.
Yes. I remember when self-care was brought up to me and I'm like, I don't have time for self-care. And the one thing that kind of resonated or really hit home, it's you make time for healthcare, self-care, or you make time for illness. Your body, either you make the time or your body will make you make the time.
Isn't that true? I think the thing that really impacted me, because I too was like, poo-poo, self-care, don't have time. I remember my husband and I sitting down to like work on, I think it was maybe like life planning kind of things, wills and things like that. And our person supporting us in that was kind of trying to help us figure out if I were to die and we have these four kids in the home with various needs, what would my husband, who works full time, need to have in place to basically reproduce what I do. It's like impossible. No one can reproduce what I do. But thinking about like, and I actually have a family that I worked with that was in a situation where the parents did have to leave the child and have a parent replacement for a number of months, and they had a medical reason for that. And so, if you had to have a parent replacement for yourself for whatever reason for a couple months, would you want that person to take good care of themselves so they can do that job of raising your kids to the best of their ability? Of course we would, sleep well, eat well, do these things, take breaks, all of those things. And so why don't we incorporate that for ourselves, to recognize we are the ones doing this job. It is valid for us to take time for that.
So you learned self-care is important and you teach your parents why self-care is important. Once they understand that, what is kind of the next steps that you kind of just dive into a little bit more of how to change the dynamic of the family, or not necessarily the dynamic of the family, but the energy that they bring into the room? Because I know how I sometimes speak to my son. If it's in a calm, open fashion, he responds differently than if it's very commanding and very abrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. That communication piece is so important. So, the understanding the self-care, like you said, really one of the early steps that I work with parents on is understanding some of how the brain works and our autonomic nervous system. And, most of us have heard the words fight, flight, or freeze, but like, what does that really mean? And what's really happening in our body without, I'm not a brain scientist. I wish I was. I think they're amazing. But like, as a parent, what is helpful to know and pay attention to each other's nervous systems and the signs that our kid is maybe going into that fight or flight stage. It's not just when we're being chased by a rabid dog or we almost get hit by a car when our nervous systems do that. And depending on our kids' wiring, if there's trauma or there's neurodiversity, they might have what I call a super sensitive smoke detector, which is detecting signs of threats or they're not feeling safe, where someone else's nervous system might not be reading it that same way, but it's still true to them. So, what are the signs that they're heading into those meltdowns or tantrums? Or shutdown, which is also a possibility, that freeze zone. And then recognizing those signs in our kids, but also in ourselves. And then we work on co regulation. So, self regulation, which is what we want for our kids eventually to be able to self regulate our emotions. Self-regulation comes after lots and lots and lots of experiences of co-regulation with a caring, attuned adult, which, hopefully we have that experience being raised as a kid, but not all of us do have that experience. And so it's not impossible to learn that and to come at it from that direction. And so, what does it look like to get ourselves back to a calmer spot so that we can help bring our kid there? Because we've all had that experience like, just calm down. And we're all stressed out. And it sure doesn't calm down our kids when we're like that.
No, no, it does not actually. Every time I'm in a hyperactivity state and I'm telling my son to calm down, doing the opposite. He senses that hyper state and it just escalates his response to it. And my older son, he's neurospicy. He'd do the meltdowns. My younger son does them as well, just in a different way. And if I'm not in a good open space, if my emotions aren't regulated and I've found my energy in a good place, they're not going to open up. They're not. It's going to take them even longer to come out of their energy area. Whether they're in a meltdown, whether they're in a freeze mode where they've completely shut down. So again, goes back to that self-regulating you, so that way you can help your child regulate, but you need to be in a space that helps them do that.
I agree. And for me, I found that humility part of it challenging at first, because honestly, when we were in a lot of struggles, I was like, I don't need to work on me. Someone needs to help this child. Like, do the right things or follow the program, or like not respond in these certain ways. Um, and to recognize that what I do can make things better or worse, and that's okay. And so, being more humble and recognizing I have a part to play in this too. And some of the ways that I interact when my child's in that fight or flight can calm things down and some of them can blow them up. And instead of feeling like, well, you're the problem, recognizing, okay, if I make adjustments here, we all do better. And that doesn't mean I'm a bad parent, it means I'm willing to grow. And that's kind of one of my hopes for all parents is that we have that open mind, that growth mindset, and we're willing to learn new tools and grow.
Yes, that's one of the reasons I have you here on Embracing Flow, is to help those parents, because it's all part of it. When with those that have daughters, how does the cycle play a role in the mom and her energy and her presence being in the house with everything that's going on with her with hormones and the daughter. How I'm sure you've come across challenges where both of them are cycling similarly, or and how can you help those moms? How do you help those moms and daughters that are dealing with cycles in addition to everything else that's going on in their household and in their world?
That's a really good question. And I would probably say maybe your listeners would be the exception to this, but I would probably say a lot of parents aren't really aware even of that dynamic being a part of it. It's more likely in my experience that parents would say, she's just being difficult, she's being defiant, she's being whatever. And we put on these different words that aren't necessarily helpful, and they affect the words, the labels that we use affect how we interact with our kids as well. That's a whole other thing we could talk about. So I would say most people that I encounter aren't really even aware of that. I am aware of it in my home with two teenage girls. And because cycles and periods weren't talked about a ton growing up, we're always trying to, I think, as parents, improve a little bit in ways, parenting, and a little bit more, a little bit better in different ways, how we interact with our kids. And so for me, that's being a little bit maybe more open or mindful to share my experience. Like, gosh, I'm just feeling a little extra emotional today. I think it's where I'm at in my cycle. And just that little drop is kind of normalizing that. And if I do that, I think I'm more likely to hear some self-reflection in my girls as well.
I appreciate that because I purposely asked that so that way for those that may not be in tune with where they are, that it does play a role. And how, again, how do we present ourselves when we approach our children different ways? So,
I think that's so good. And, I'm just thinking of like the men in our families too. And maybe one thing that is not helpful in my experience would be if a man in the home is like, what is she on her period? And like that's the blame all for any emotional struggle. It, to me, just really diminishes our experience as women. It's not just about our periods. It's a part of it, but it's also, I think the men in our lives really can only understand a tiny bit of that experience. So I don't know how many dads you have, but you have moms who have partners. And so
yes.
even just sharing, like, that's probably not the most helpful way. There's maybe a more empathetic way to approach that, or less judgy way, maybe.
Yeah. I was just thinking in a way it's when our partners do become emotional, which a lot of men feel that showing emotion can sometimes be very anti-masculine. But when they happen to do that and looking at them going, what, do you have low testosterone today? It's kind of the same thing. It's we that they feel attacked, and we kind of feel attacked when, oh, what, are you PMSing today? Are you on the rag today? What's going on? Um, but yeah, just being able to approach those conversations in different ways that aren't as alienating um, as what they could be in removing those some of those ways that we discuss with
Hmm.
cycles. The one question that keeps coming back to me is, and it's in your bio, brains, was it brain stomping?
Brain spotting.
Brain spotting. Yes, brain spotting. What is a brain spotting practitioner?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. And if people want to like learn more, the main website to go to is brainspotting.com. That's not my website. It's like the hub of brain spotting. But brain spotting is a tool. It can be used by mental health therapists, which I am not. I'm a physical therapist, but be used by coaches, nurses, PTs, can use it. But basically, it's a way of helping a person's brain kind of sink down into the subcortical part of the brain. The cortical part is more of like our thinking, talking part of it. Subcortical is deeper than that. Um, and to get into our deeper part of our brain and process emotional events or things that basically have an emotional hold on you. So, working with kids who've experienced trauma, well, we'll just even start with their parents. Kids who have big behaviors because of whatever reasons, that is challenging for the parents. And sometimes it causes a lot of resentment, our own trauma sometimes, which maybe we don't use that word, but a lot of resentment, a lot of emotions that come up when we come back to interacting with our kids again, because there's so much baggage there. And so a brain spotting practitioner facilitates that process to help the person get into that deeper part of the brain and then help the brain process those emotionally charged events so that they don't have the same tight hold on you when you think about them or they get triggered. Again, you don't have the same body reaction, physical reaction to it. It's not like we erase it from your memory in any way, but it releases its grip on you. So that can be true for anxieties. I work with kids with specific anxieties like fear of shots, fear of dogs, fear of getting sick at school, a lot of things like that, specific anxieties, but it can be working on some of the trauma.
Do you do that through a visualization to get rid of those like emotions to those, or is it like some of them go into a hypnotic state? How, without going too deep into it, how is that? How's the process done?
Yeah, so I can do it virtually or in person, but brain spotting is using the idea, and this is really interesting, but where we look affects how we feel about something. So it uses our visual gaze to get into a part of our brain, access that, and process it. So it uses some specific music called bilateral music. It's got tones and different tones in both ears, and then the facilitator helps find that visual point where we can process, and it might change from time to time. I think one of my favorite just little examples of that is if I asked you or the listeners to think back to what you had for dinner 2 nights ago. See if you can think about what you had for dinner. And if I give you a moment, most people, if I was looking at you, would be like, oh, did you notice where your eyes went? Most of us have our eyes like, what did I have for dinner? And our eyes go to a certain spot. And why does that happen? Well, our visual gaze is connected to memories and information that's in our brain.
That is fascinating. I thinking about, and even when I come up with questions and stuff, I sometimes my eyes go to different areas and different corners. That, wow, that
It is really
that
so
is
interesting.
that is really, really fascinating.
I'll tell you one of my favorite, if we have a moment, one of my favorite
Absolutely.
examples before I became a practitioner, my oldest child, who's 19 now, he was a premature baby in the NICU for several weeks. And right from the get-go, coming home with him, would start to shake physically when he had to have shots, and he had to have a lot of extra shots and blood draws because of his prematurity. Well, that was something that's just continued for years and years. And, when he was little, I could hold him, they'd quick give him the shot or whatever, and we'd move on, give him the sucker. But as he got bigger, and now he's 6'3", 6'4", when he was getting to those teen years, I really couldn't like wrestle him down to get those shots, but he would have very physical symptoms of his distress, sweating, heart rate increasing. He was in distress about this idea of the shot. And we connected it to possibly this NICU experience and the idea that your body remembers things, even if you don't have a verbal memory of that. Your brain is amazing. And so he did brain spotting with a different practitioner for that issue. And ever since then has been able to go and get his shots, not that he like looks forward to getting extra if he doesn't have to, but he's able to roll up his sleeve and get those shots without it consuming him.
Thank you for sharing that story, because that is a testament to what this does and how something that we may not consciously remember, because as infants we don't remember a lot, consciously remember a lot, but our body does remember. And going through that process and sharing how he was before, and the visual response that he had just to say, hey, we're going to give you a shot, to where he is now, is that's amazing. I'm very happy that you had found this, uh, and it's helped him tremendously, so that way he can go and not have that attached fear going into taking care of his own well being as he
Yeah.
ages. Is there anything else you would love to share with our listeners um, before we get into where they can find you?
Oh gosh, we could talk forever, I think, Heather.
I know.
One of the things that I, focus with parents on is building our own resilience as parents, doing our own growth and work. It really does make an impact in the tone of the family. And one of my favorite ways to help parents with that resilient building is finding ways to focus on the positives as humans, and some of us more than others. We really do have a negativity bias, and it's a protective mechanism in our brain to be like, what's wrong? What's not right? What do I need to change? And so it's not a bad thing if your brain is wired that way. My brain is wired. It's like you can come into the house, and if there's one thing out of place or one bowl of cereal that's like hardening, and I'm like, why? Why did someone have to leave their cereal bowl here? But there's 10 things I could probably comment on that are positive. And so finding ways to focus on the positive, one thing that any of your listeners could do right now is to think about 5 positive things about each of your kids and just write them down somewhere. And then I call it the post-it note challenge. Sometimes I have parents do this when we're working together and write one thing on each post-it note and then plop them on your kid's door, one a day for 5 days or one a week for 5 weeks, however you want to do it. And it's just something positive that you see about that child, focusing on their strengths. Because even if they're in a season of struggle or they're challenging to you as a parent in some ways, we do want to like help them see their strengths and help them grow those positive things. And with time, the negative things will become less like have a less impact on them. So a post-it note challenge, if you have kids who have phones, you could text them that positive thing if you want to. I like the post-it note on the door, and I always tell parents like some of my kids will leave those post-it notes up there for eternity. And some of my kids, if they're mad at me, they'll tear them all down, scrunch them all up in front of me and leave them on the floor just to let me know that they're unhappy. And I don't care either way because they read the notes and they saw that I see positives and strengths in them. And so mission accomplished either way.
And I love that idea because as thinking about my teenage years, and especially with some of the arguments that I've had with my mother and even my father and my stepfather and stuff, knowing that your parents see you and love you for things that you may have not thought of. It's like, oh, okay, they did see that or they did hear about that and they're proud of me for it. It's validating the child in a time where the child verbally may not be able to say it, but it's like, oh, okay, I am valuable to my parents. I'm not a burden to my parents. I'm not their life would be better without me in it. It's you as a parent saying, I love you without actually having to say it. It's them seeing something about themselves that they know. And sometimes they may not have even seen it in
Yeah.
themselves, but it's being brought to their attention by their parent, which is in some ways it's huge.
So powerful. It can be so
It is
powerful.
extremely
I
powerful.
love talking to parents when they have implemented that and like their feedback. Sometimes their kids are like, are you going to do that again? Are you going to put another note on? Like, kind of curious what else you might like about me, or what other strengths you might see. Like, they're not necessarily saying all of that, but they're like, are you going to do that more?
Yep.
Um, and some
It
some kids don't comment on it at all, and it doesn't matter because they still are seeing it.
They are. And it touches them because I know there are some things that I've done for my older son that he's come back around later in life. And I said, that really meant a lot to me, Mom, when you did this. And it was something silly, like just putting a post-it note with a smiley face in his lunch bag or his snack bag. Have a great day. To some of it, that's not, but to him, it meant so much. And it was so powerful for him to knowing that even though mom's busy, even though I may not see mom, she does see me. She does care about me. And
Absolutely.
it warms my heart when he brings stuff like that. I'm like, you remembered I did that? He's like, yeah, that had a huge. I'm like, I did not realize that had such a huge impact on your life.
Oh, you got to embrace those moments, right? When you get a little
Oh,
positive
absolutely.
feedback and you're like, oh, thank you. I am doing
Yeah.
good work. It's not
Yeah.
always a lot of positive feedback or, a lot of pats on the back necessarily. And so enjoy them. I love that.
I've been very fortunate to have a really, really good relationship with my older son. We've been able to talk in the car when I was transporting him to his dad's house. So I know his and my relationship is special, and it's not what every parent has with their teen sons or even teen daughters, but just him saying those little notes. So I love that post-it note challenge. That might be something I put into place for my younger son, because sometimes I think he could really benefit from that in many different ways. Where can individuals find more about you, more about what you do, and how you help parents in these situations?
Yeah, the go-to place is my website which is livestouchedcoaching.com. Livestouchcoaching.com, and that's where there's a link to my book there. There's a link to some recorded trainings if you just want a little information about supporting your kids with ADHD, or if you want a lot of information like a day-long parenting conference that's recorded, that's there as well. You can also reach out, send me an email. You can get on my mailing list, and just every 2 weeks or month, I send out some parenting ideas, just little tips for the season, where we're at, different ages and stages. I don't bomb you with tons of stuff, but I would love to stay in touch. So livestouchcoaching.com.
I love it, and don't be surprised if you see my email on there. I just found out my younger son may have. We've known got something, and it looks like he may have ADHD.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's what you're sharing with me could be beneficial, very beneficial for our household. Because my older son, he's neurospicy. He's on the autistic spectrum, where they don't think my younger son is. They think he's just ADHD.
Hmm.
So I will definitely be looking at getting on that mailing list to get some tips and suggestions from you.
Yes, we'll stay in touch.
Before we go, do you have any wise words of wisdom for us to take with us?
I would say to all the parents listening, the thing I want you to hear is that you are the right person for the job. You are the right parent for the kids who are in your home. And sometimes we really feel like, yep, we're hitting a home run. And other times we feel like, oh my gosh, I messed up again. I blew up at my kid, or, did this or that. And that is a normal part of being a parent. And just remember, you are in that position for a reason. You're the right person for the job, and also that growth mindset, no matter where we are, how long we've been a parent, or if we're hoping to become a parent and we're not there yet. Like, we can grow and develop skills where we're at. We want our kids to develop skills, but the understanding of the brain is so different now. It's not fixed and like plastic, it's changeable. We can create new pathways in our brains, we can build new skills. And so embrace that.
I love it. Those are amazing words to take with us and end on. Thank you so much, Dana, for taking us on this enlightening journey into trauma and how you can work through that in many different ways and through many different stages.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Heather.
Oh, you are welcome. All of the links can be found that we discussed can be found in the show notes. Thank you, listeners, for spending your time with us today. If you found a nugget of wisdom or a moment of empowerment, our mission is accomplished. Do you know someone who could benefit from this information? Please share Embracing Flow with them. And until next time, my friends, love hard, laugh often, and as always, be vividous. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, submit a rating and review, and share it with your friends. Visit my website, embracingflowpodcast.com, to receive your free guide on 4 ways to decrease PMS. The link is in the show notes. Information shared on the Embracing Flow podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. Until next time, love hard, laugh often, And always be vividus.